Tonight we're still looking at the kings, and of course we're on this side of David's family. That's the good side that we're looking, and the only good kings that Israel's had of the combined kingdom of Israel has been from David's descendants. We looked at, first of all, we kind of got turned around. We took the last king first, and we had talked about Josiah. What made him to be classified in the minds of people as one of the good kings of Israel. Then we decided to go ahead with it, and so we thought we'll go back and start at the front and see how that works out. So we went back to the end, and the third descendant of David after Solomon, one of Solomon's was Asa. And he was category. Two kings before him didn't fall into that category, but we studied Asa that he did. Now we closed with Asa in the 2 Chronicles chapter 16. We closed with kind of a sad ending for this man, because it said that while his younger years he was right on fire for God. He was very active in the enemies of God. But it seems that toward the end, that after he failed to believe God concerning the war that he had gotten himself into, and he had called for the king of Syria to come down and relieve him of the king of Judah, or the king of Israel, that was waging war against the southern kingdom. And a prophet was sent from God and told him, why didn't you have faith in God to handle this? Why did you turn to the world? Why did you turn to the king of Syria, who is certainly an enemy of the Jew? And he had been paying trophy to him, so he called him to come down and do war. And so as a result, when the war was given the victory of it, we find that God sent a prophet. He said, Hananiah, a seer, came to Asa, the king of Judah, and I won't read all that in the 16th chapter, but he told him, God delivered the Ethiopian hordes to you, and you believe God because you said plainly that it's no problem with God to handle any situation. But here he turned around, decided, I guess, that God couldn't handle the northern kingdom, or wouldn't. So he asked for the Ben-Hadad to come in and wage war. And so he just said, he really condemned the king. He said, whose heart is perfect toward him. He said, God always blesses that. So what he's really saying to Asa was, your heart's changing toward God. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could always stay on top of the mountain toward God? But with the courses of life, it doesn't always happen, does it? We'll have good days, we'll have bad, we'll have good years, we'll have bad years. But there's one thing that we always need to have confidence in. And Asa started out with absolute confidence as far as God's power, but when he ended up, the prophet said, and Asa was, when he read, your heart's not perfect toward God, is what the prophet told him. And Asa, verse 10, said Asa was wroth with us there and put him in prison. Well, now, that was something that was, did the prophet expect that? I doubt it. But he turned against God in that particular sense, that he put his prophet. He didn't like the message that God had sent through the prophet. So he put him in jail. We know that after it rained, that his feet went bad on him, and Asa slept with his fathers. But it kind of closes with that last verse of the 16th chapter. It said in verse 14, he said, and they buried him in his own sepulchres. Well, that was in Jerusalem, which he had made for himself in the city of David, and laid him in the bed which was filled with sweet odors, divers kinds of spices, prepared by the apothecary's art, and made him a very great burnings for him. Burnings were the symbols of the burial of the kings of the heathens. But you say, well, you don't know that for sure. No, I don't. But the thing of it is, the apothecaries, and the word in the Bible is really basically, these were men that were not on the best so we say the best relationship with God. They were generally sort of worked with false prophets, and many of their actions and attitudes and what they performed was not godly. But anyway, it said that he was buried with great burnings. Now you can look at that two ways. That was the way they buried the kings of the heathen. They burned them with great burnings. But we don't know that that's the case here. It could have been that these great burnings were those particular spices and those things that the apothecaries had prepared. But we do know that he ended up. So when we move into chapter 17, we find now that the throne is transferred to Jehoshaphat. Let's read beginning with verse 17. We'll read several verses tonight and just kind of look at this. And Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in his stead, and he strengthened himself against Israel. Now Israel was still apparently a great power, even though Ben-Hadad had captured 4 or 5 of the cities of the northern kingdom of Israel, but he apparently was a power. And so we find that he armed and strengthened himself against Israel. And he placed forces in the fenced cities of Judah, and set garrisons in the land of Judah and in the cities of Ephraim. Now, we think about Ephraim. Ephraim is one of the tribes of the 12 tribes. But in the beginning, Ephraim went with the northern kingdoms. And Ephraim scattered across the middle, just north of Judah, across the land from the Jordan River, clear over to the oceans. And in his wars against the king of Israel, he had taken this whole country. So we find then that basically his strength is drawn out of Judah, and out of the strength of Ephraim, and out of what's the youngest son? Slipped the name. In there was the other tribe. I can't think of it right now. Just like I don't know Neil's name half the time. But anyway, these 3 kingdoms, and so the Lord was with Jehoshaphat, verse 3. And the Lord was with Jehoshaphat, and because he walked in the first ways of his father. Notice that? First ways of his father. What does that mean? Well, he was walking the way his dad walked when he first took the throne. In other words, he was what? He was tearing down the altars of the false gods that were. He was cleaning out the high places. Remember, he even took his own mother off the throne because she built a grove and had made an idol under the grove. So when the Lord said here, he walked the first ways of his daughter David, and sought not unto Balaam, but sought to the Lord God of his father, and walked in his commandments, and not after the doings of Israel. That's the northern kingdom, the northern 10 tribes. Therefore, the Lord established the kingdom in his hands, and all Judah brought to Jehoshaphat presents, and he had riches and honor in abundance. But now we notice this. You know, it wouldn't be like if we could be perfect with God and live perfect, but you just don't. In the flesh, we don't. But here it says, and his heart was lifted up in the ways of the Lord. Moreover, he took away the high places and the groves out of Judah. Now, what it means, his heart was lifted up in the Lord. His father did not completely purge. Asa was considered a good king, and God blessed him. But apparently there was things that he left undone. There's things that God probably wanted done, and he did not do them. And of course, toward the end of his life, he probably became very slack on maintaining, because it's one thing to do the will of God, but when we slack off and quit doing the will of God, that's what happened to Asa. And so his heart was lifted up in the ways of the Lord. In other words, he had a revival. That's about as good a word as you can put there. His heart was lifted up in the ways of the Lord. Moreover, he took away the high places and the groves out of Judah. In other words, he cleaned out the places that his father never got around to doing. In other words, he kind of brought a shall we say, revival to the land. And also in the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his princes. Now here we'll notice that he's going a step ahead of what his father even considered doing. In the 3rd year of the reign, he went to the princes, even to Ben-Hail and to Obadiah. Anybody remember that name? Obadiah the prophet? Obadiah and Zechariah, we remember him. We got a book by him. And so, and to Nehemiah, and he went on to say, and Micah, like the book of Micah, to teach in the cities of Judah. He was anxious, and he was reestablishing not only the fact of God, but he wanted to put them in the cities to teach them the ways of God. We don't find that of his father. His father pursued the way of God, so his heart was pleasing with God. But here he takes it another step. So he brought into the land, he brought the prophets of God into the land with the command that they were to teach all the people of the city of Judah the ways of the Lord, the commandments of the Lord. And verse 8 says, and with them he sent Levites. Well, that means that probably his father did not establish the principles of the Levites. Who are the Levites? Remember, the Levites are those that were given responsibility and charge of all the activities of the house of God. The Levites were the priests. What was the duty of the priests? We find the prophet's responsibility from God is to tell us what God wants. But the Levites were the responsibility of taking care of the cows, and were supposed to speak to God on behalf of the people. And so they find that he made these changes. So he sent these, and I'm not going to run that list of names because I probably mess them up anyway. But it going down, Levites with them, Elishama and Jehoram, in verse 9. And they taught in Judah. In other words, as his people were probably not versed in the things of God. But he was so concerned that his people and the Judah and Benjamin, I got that right, Benjamin and Ephraim, that they know the ways of God. Now, there was a great job to do in Ephraim because that was one of the places where the golden calves had been established. And so they taught in Judah, and they had the book of the law of the Lord with them, and went about throughout the cities of Judah and taught the people. They were probably some evangelists. Let's just say they're evangelists. They were out to teach the people. They traveled all around to the tribe of Benjamin, all the way through the tribe of Judah, all the way through Ephraim, which had been recently conquered, and probably had a job to do there in teaching them. But here we find that it was met with success, verse 10. And the fear of the Lord fell upon the kingdoms of the lands that were round about Judah, and so that they made no war against Jehoshaphat. In other words, Ephraim was one of the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom. They were probably in a state of rebellion when they were conquered. But because they were taught the things and the ways of God, not only was it Ephraim, but you had the Moabites. You have the other tribes that are around. You have the Philistines. You have all those. But we find that round about Judah, so they made no war against Jehoshaphat. He had a king. Verse 11. So we find then that what all this was doing with the presenting of the God to the people and the response of the people to God, verse 11 says, and some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and tributes of silver, and the Arabians brought him flocks, 7,700 rams, and 7,700 he-goats. And Jehoshaphat waxed great exceedingly, and he built in Judah castles and cities of store. In other words, God poured out the blessings upon this king. And you know, as I read through this again, I couldn't help but think how God had poured out the blessings on America. As long as this country stayed true to God on which they were founded, the blessings continue to flow. We are a far cry from that now, aren't we? We've brought in the wrong kind of prophets into our land. And I don't really say much more about that because I'm liable to say something I'll not be happy with. But anyway, verse 13. And he had much business in the cities of Judah, and the men of war, mighty men of valor, were in Jerusalem. Now, he had much business in the cities of Judah. What's happening to us right now? Depression. When did we begin to really start? We had several major depressions. We just recently had another major depression. What's happened? That's because we were turning away from God. And so here he said, he had much business in the cities of Judah, the men of war, mighty men of valor in Jerusalem, and these are the numbers of them according to the house of their fathers of Judah. He said, and the captain of the thousands, Adonai, chief, and with him mighty men of valor, 300,000. Next to him was Jehoshaphat, the captain, with him 280,000, that's 280,000. And with him was Amasiah, the son of Zechariah, who offered himself unto the Lord. Now, here's a leader. Here's a captain of men. Here's a general. And what it says? It said, and he willingly offered himself unto the Lord, and with him 200,000 more men of valor. In other words, he said, I'm going to serve God, but I'm going to serve my king, but I'm going to serve God. You know, that's what we need today in our country. You can be in the mess we were in. And so, and a Benjamin, this is a little tribe, Adada, sounds more like something else. Well, anyway, mighty man of valor, and with him armed men with a bow and shield, 200,000. And next to him was Jehoaz, and he made of him 180,000 ready, prepared for war. And these waited on the king, besides those whom the king put in the fenced cities throughout Judah. He had a great standing army, but he also had more that were on details in all throughout the cities, throughout all Judah. That included Ephraim, and that included the tribes of Benjamin as well. You know, here was a man that was experiencing fantastically the blessings of God upon his nation. And you know, we've experienced that, haven't we? No nation has ever been blessed like America has. But we want to find something. We go to 18. Now let's look what happens here in 18. Because this king is perfect as he was performing clear up to here. He's now going to mess up. So here he says right here. Now Jehoshaphat had riches and honor in abundance, and he joined affinity with Ahab. Ahab, a wicked king of the northern kingdom. They had been his enemies. And yet here we find he's making a deal with his enemy. And after certain years, he went down to Ahab in Samaria. Well, you know, Jerusalem's the highest place over there. Anywhere you go down. So he went up to Ahab, and Ahab was a worshiper of Baal. He's the one married Jezebel. That doesn't sound good, does it? But anyway, Ahab killed sheep and oxen for him in abundance, and for the people that he had with him, and persuaded him to go with him to Ramoth Gilead. What he's doing, he's trying to involve this godly king. Now, this godly king should know better, shouldn't he? Well, I mean, we don't have much of a leader now, but I think he's too easily swayed. Well, that's what happened to this good king right here. It's a good thing. He said, you go up with me to Ramoth Gilead. And Ahab the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat of Judah, wilt thou go with me to Ramoth Gilead? He answered him, I am as thou art, and my people as thy people. We will be with thee in the war. And no business lining himself with this. Unholy confederates is not good for anything. We've made some alliances that have been pretty sad that we made. And so he said, now, he said, my people are like your people. I don't think he asked his people. I think he just, as the king, blessed of God, finally got, shall we say, on the high horse. And here he's riding off into the sunset. But anyway, he said, my people are there. And so Jehoshaphat said unto the king of Israel, Jehoshaphat, he did have some common sense here. He said, unto the king of Israel, inquire, I pray thee, at the word of the Lord today. He said, I want to know if this thing I'm getting into is in agreement with God. That's what he's really saying. So he said, I want you to pray. He said, inquire, I pray thee, of the word of the Lord today. And therefore the king of Israel gathered together of the prophets 400 men. Sound pretty familiar? There's 400 of Baal's prophets that Elijah killed on Mount Carmel when he had the showdown with Israel. He said to 400 men, and said unto them, shall we go to Ramoth Gilead to battle? or shall I forbear? And they said, Go up, God will deliver thee into the king's hand. Whoa, that didn't go with that speaker, did it? For the king's hand. God will deliver it in the king's hand. But Jehoshaphat, now he's exercising some caution. But Jehoshaphat said, Is there not a prophet of the Lord besides, that we might inquire of him? So either he recognized these prophets were false prophets. He said, Isn't there a prophet around here? After all, he's in Samaria. He's in the capital. And he's a worshiper of Baal. And Jezebel had her false prophets all there. He said, Is there not a prophet that we might inquire of him? And the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, There is one man by whom we may inquire the Lord. Only one prophet left in the 10 tribes of Israel? Apparently that's the case. He said, There's only one man by whom we may inquire. He said, But I hate him. Now that should have been enough for Jehoshaphat. That he hated the prophets of God, or hated this prophet of God, only one man. But I hate him, for he never prophesied good unto me, but always evil. You know what? He was simply telling them what God had to say. It wasn't a question there. So he said, There is one man by whom we inquire the Lord, but I hate him, for he never prophesied good unto me. One voice for God. Out of 10 tribes of Israel, that's all there was here. That's the only one that Ahab could raise hands on. So the same thing he said unto Micah, the son of Imlah, and Jehoshaphat said, Let not the king say so. In other words, he said, I want to hear from him. I want to hear this prophet of God. And the king of Israel called unto one of his officers and said, Fetch quickly Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, set either of them on his throne, clothed in their robes, and they sat in a void place at the entering of the gate of Samaria, and all the prophets prophesied before them. Boy, that must have been quite a show, because 300 prophets of Jezebel, 400 prophets, that was the rating number of the Baal prophets. That's 700. They were sitting in a nice place on the throne, a place that you could feel popular, you could feel loved, you could feel a whole lot of things. And so Zedekiah, the son of Chenaanah, stood up and prophet. Now here's somebody else. This Chenaanah is of the tribe of Benjamin. Well, now he's supposed to be a prophet of God. That's what he's supposed to be. And Zedekiah, the son of Chenaanah, made him horns of iron and said, Thus saith the Lord, With these thou shalt push Syria until they be consumed. He's supposed to be a prophet of God, but he's prophesying just what the other prophets of Baal were saying. He was obeying the orders of somebody to do this, but I don't know what the behind it was. And said, All the prophets cry so, saying, Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and prosper, for the Lord shall deliver it unto the hand of the king. Now let's go back to this messenger. And the messenger that sent to call Micaiah spake unto him, saying, in other words, before I take you back to appear before this magnificent council going on in the city, he said, Behold, the words of the prophet. The prophets desire good to the king with one assent. Let thy word, therefore, I pray thee, be like one of theirs, and speak thou good. He wasn't going to let him prophesy. He said, I want you to do what the king tells you to do. That's really what he's saying. And you know, that happens way too often. But anyway, verse 13. And Micaiah said, As the Lord liveth, even what my God saith I shall speak. Now he said this to the messenger. He said, I want you to know what my Lord say is what I will say. Now we go on. And so when he comes to the king, and the king said unto him, Micaiah, shall we go up to Ramoth-Gilead to battle, or shall I forbear? Now he said, I want you to think, this must have been said with, have you ever heard somebody say something that, it was just ridiculing? Oh, you think you're smart or something like this. Must have been this prophet way he said here. He said, yeah, go up and you shall prosper and you shall deliver it in the hand. And the king said, he must have recognized something. He said, and the king said unto him, how many times shall I adjure thee that thou shalt say nothing but the truth to me in the name of the Lord? All right. So he decided, now I'm just going to, it's what you want, the thing of the truth. Okay, here it is. Then he said, I did see all of Israel. That's the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes. I did see all of Israel scattered upon the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. And the Lord said, these have no master. Let them return therefore every man to his house in peace. In other words, he's saying, you just need to go back to your house in peace. All the armies of the northern kingdom. He said, just go back. That's happened before. Remember, I can't remember battle right now, but this has happened. In other words, they didn't fight the battle because God told them not to, but they went home. But anyway, the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, now this is Ahab, he said to Jehoshaphat, did I not tell thee that he would not prophesy good unto me, but evil? I said, I told you what he was going to say. He'll prophesy evil. And he said again, therefore hear the word of the Lord. Now here we go. This is the prophet again. This is Micah. Therefore I hear the word of the Lord. Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting upon his throne, and all the host of seven standing on his right hand and all his left. Here's a vision. This prophet is telling him a vision he's had when he was summoned. He said, and the Lord said, who shall entice Ahab, king of Israel, that he may go up to fall at Ramoth-Gilead? What he's saying here, he said, who's going to go ahead, get him to go ahead? Because that's where he's going to get taken out. Hey, he's going to fall there. He's going to die there. And so he said, and one spake after this manner, another saying after this manner. Mind, this is a scene of heaven. Then there came out a spirit and stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. Now you say, well, what's this kind of a spirit doing before the Lord? If you remember back in the book of Job, Satan appeared in the presence of God. So this spirit came out. It said he said it came out a spirit. Now where did it come from? Probably the bottomless pit is probably where it came from. He said, and he stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. And the Lord said unto him, wherewith? He said, I'll go out and be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. Well, they were already the lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. They were all saying, let's go, you're going to be a winner, king. And said, and the Lord said, thou shalt entice him, and he shall prevail to go out and do even so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord hath put a lying spirit in the mouth of thy prophets, and the Lord hath spoken evil against them. In other words, these prophets that were prophesying unto Ahab already must have had the presence of that lying spirit in them. Because, chronologically, we can't set that. But anyway, they've spoken evil. Then Zedekiah, the son of Shena, here we go again, Shena, came near and smote Micah upon the cheek and said, which way went the Spirit of the Lord from thee to speak unto thee? And Micaiah said, behold, thou shalt see on the day when thou shalt go into thy inner chamber to hide thyself. And then the king of Israel said, take ye Micaiah and carrying him, now this is Ahab again, and carry him back to Ammon, to the governor of that city, and to Joash the king's son. This is the city, taking him back. This King Joash was the son of Ahab. And say thus, says the king, put this fellow in prison, feed him with the bread of affliction, and with the water of affliction until I return in peace. In other words, he said, you lock him up and don't be kind to him. In fact, probably the torture was involved in that. And he said, till I return in peace. And Micaiah said, if thou certainly return in peace, then hath not the Lord spoken by me? And he said, hearken, all ye people. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth-Gilead. Well, here's this good king. He's got no business in the company with Ahab, an idol worshiper. None whatsoever. But he went up to Ramoth-Gilead, and the king of Israel said unto Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and will go into battle. But put thou on the robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself, and they went into battle. I don't know. He must not have been very bright on this decision. He was a great king, no doubt. But he must have not been very bright on this decision, because he said, I'm just going to, Ahab said, I'm just going to go in as a common man, but you dress up as a king. Well, who's going to get all the attention from the enemy? You know, the king, the chariots. So, put on the robe. Now the king of Syria had commanded the captains of the chariots that were with him, saying, fight ye not against the small or the great, save only with the king of Israel. Well, this war was against basically primarily the king of Israel, and he said to his soldiers, you go get the king. And so here we find Ahab just dressed as a common warrior, but we find the king of Judah dressed fit to a king. So who is the army going to go after? The northern kingdom. And it came to pass, when the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, that they said, it is the king of Israel. Therefore they compassed about him to fight. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped him. Who did he call? Now he calls on the Lord. He should have considered the Lord, for he got in the mess, but he called upon the Lord. And Jehoshaphat cried out, and the Lord helped them, and the Lord moved them to depart from him. In other words, he turned the army. They went looking for Ahab. And so, for it came to pass that when the captain of the chariot perceived it was not the king, they turned back. And a certain man drew a bow at venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints and the harness. Now he stayed up until he won the battle. Well, let's finish the chapter. I'll just read it out. You can get it for yourself. And a certain man drew a bow at venture and smote the king of Israel between the joints of the harness. And therefore he said to his chariot man, turn thy hand, that thou mayest carry me out of the host, for I am wounded. And the battle increased that day. Howbeit the king of Israel stayed himself up in his chariot against the Syrians until the evening, and about the time of the sun going down, he died. Okay, so take up 19. I hope that, I don't know. I hope you got something out of that. But you know, it's a word of God, and there's so much that we see here. It just reminds me of so much that's going on in our world today. Bad counsel, stupid counsel, allies, affinity with people we have no business of being in affinity with. Accepting the leadership and nations of people that absolutely do not even know our God. We made the greatest mistake we ever made in our nation when we opened our doors to every religion that is in the world. And we call it freedom religion. I call it death to religion, really, to true religion. So anyway, there you have it.